Okay, this is simplifying the rules of tenacity. Now, those of you who haven't seen tenacity before might be surprised that what I'm about to share with you is a simplified version. Tenacity is a topic which is full of exceptions and exceptions to the exceptions, and we can even make a case for an exception to the exception to the exception. Now, my simplified version of that is one general rule, 5 exceptions, and 3 exceptions to the exceptions. Okay? Okay, the general rule stays the same. The nucleus goes on the last lexical item. I like coffee. The first 2 exceptions you're also going to recognize. The first one is idioms. Now, it's not that idioms are not accented on the last lexical item, they may be. But idioms do whatever they want, just like they do in every other area of language. So you have idioms such as it beats me, where the nucleus is on a grammatical item, not a lexical one, or that's a good boy, or so on and so forth. So idioms don't necessarily follow rules, okay? The second exception is contrast. Whenever there is contrast, the nucleus tends to be on the contrasting element, whether lexical or grammatical. I heard your brothers bought a new car. No, I bought a new car, okay? The contrast can either be explicit or implicit. For example, if you ask, who did this, and I reply, I did it myself, although reflexive pronouns are typically not accented, the reason why I say I did it myself and not just I did it is that I assume that you think that I either had help or someone else did it for me. So that reflexive pronoun contrasts with what I think your expectations are. Okay, exception 3 is unnecessary words, and here is where a lot of the typical exceptions will go. You see, when asked why you accent a certain word in a phrase, most people reply something to the effect that that word was important for them. And while that is true, tonicity, and accent in general, is really mostly about the listener. We accent content words because the listener cannot necessarily guess them. They need to hear them in order to understand the message. But we don't accent function words because they are guessable. If I say I went to the cinema, although there are 2 words you could not hear, you can guess them and hence guess what I meant, right? So we accent what the listener needs to hear. If we apply this idea to tonicity, we can see that the listener does not always need to hear the last lexical item. If there are 2 cars in front of us and I ask which car do you prefer, I don't need to hear the word car in your reply. So you will say I prefer the blue car or even the blue one. In fact, that is a good trick to decide whether or not you should accent the last lexical item. If you can replace it by a deictic reference without changing the meaning or implication, we'll get back to that later, that means you don't need to accent it. By the same token, deictic references themselves tend not to be accented, even if they're content words. You may also be able to replace a word by nothing, as when you say, I want some, and once again that means you don't need that word. Just like you don't need general words such as stuff, which are kind of just saying there is a noun here, or vocatives, because we can safely assume you know your name and title and so on, so you don't need to hear it, right? You may have noticed that the first 2 exceptions, idioms and contrast, are written in capital letters and bold type. The reason for that is that they're more important than the others, so you always need to watch out for idiomatic expressions and contrast. For example, I said deictic references tend not to be accented, but there are some expressions with the word one for which that one is the nucleus, such as only one, okay? Going back to the example of the cars, you may have also noticed I didn't accent the word car in the question either. That's because if we're both looking at the cars, you still know what I'm talking about. The context is making the word unnecessary. Well, this is just as true when the word is the last lexical item. You could have said I like the blue car with the nucleus on blue, or even I like the blue one, before I actually asked the question, okay? So that's it for exception 3. What's with the attitude? I'm writing these things. Never mind. Remember when I said meaning or implication? Well, this is what I was thinking about. I live in Argentina, so if you ask me, what did you do last night? And I replied, I went to Japan, you're very likely to show some disbelief because, well, the laws of physics. And the word that would prompt such disbelief would be the word Japan. So that's a word you need to accent if you want me to know that you don't really believe me. Okay? Deciding to accent something because it's in contrast, or deciding to de-accent something because it's unnecessary, are linguistic choices. However, not every pause is a linguistic choice. One day I'm going to make a video about the concept of the pause, because I think the way we're defining that is not helping. Spanish speakers, such as myself, never make mistakes in tonality while speaking English. Yet we make many mistakes in transcriptions. I don't know if this is also true for those with a different L1 or studying a different L2, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was, because I think there is some problem with the way we are defining pauses. And the word pause itself may be part of that problem. Some pauses are just there because the phrase is too long, and not because the information requires the chunking. We can refer to these as breath pauses, and since they are linguistically irrelevant, we don't necessarily make linguistic choices for the chunk preceding them. So when followed by a breath pause, a final noun in particular may bear the nucleus even if there's something else that is in contrast, and even if it conveys unnecessary information. For example, if you ask me, why aren't the lights off? I may say, I turned on the lights because I knew you were coming, placing the nucleus on lights for the first chunk, even though it's been mentioned and even though on and off are in contrast. Final verbs tend to be de-accented when either preceded or interrupted by noun phrases. I say interrupted because of the case of phrasal verbs and some passive constructions such as get your hair done. Now, careful, they have to be preceded or interrupted by noun phrases and not part of them. If we take the famous example from Wells 2006, I have instructions to leave, versus I have instructions to leave, we'll see that in the first case, the noun phrase instructions is the object of the verb leave. But in the second case, to leave is actually a post modifier of instructions, and so it's part of the noun phrase itself. So it's not preceded by a noun phrase, and hence it is accented. Okay? Yeah, you'll need to remember your grammar lessons. It's not all good news. Exception 4 has an exception which I'm kind of angry about, because I need to include it just because grammarians decided that a noun phrase didn't need to have a noun. So I need to tell you that this exception doesn't work for pronouns. So it's get your hair done, but it's get it done. Okay? Grammarians. Final adverbs and adverbials are typically unaccented. Now, this exception has an exception which is kind of hard to explain. You do accent adverbs or adverbials when they complete the meaning or implication, again, of the clause. So if I say I saw your friend today, today is not accented because it doesn't complete the meaning or implication of I saw your friend. It does add information, but it does not complete the meaning or implication of the clause, right? But if I say you should run faster, faster does get accented because it does complete the meaning of you should run, okay? Now, there are some interesting cases, for example, with enough. If we are looking at a basketball player and you say he's not tall enough, that means he's short. The word enough is sort of irrelevant. But if you say he's not tall enough, that means if he grows a couple of inches, he may become a good player. So the word enough is relevant there, right? Yeah, I know. I did warn you it was hard to explain, didn't I? There is another exception, but I feel it is so obvious that we do not need to include it in the graph. Namely, you will accent anything if you have nothing better to accent. For example, if I say where is John from, John will be the nucleus. But if I say where is he from, in a neutral context, because in this context it's in contrast, but in a neutral context the nucleus will be from, because, well, what else will it be? Also, we say we don't accent final vocatives or adverbials, but if they have their own chunk, in that chunk you will need a nucleus. So again, what else will you accent? Okay? That's kind of it. Now, I'm going to issue a challenge here. I want you to try to find examples where these simplifier rules would not work, and we'll discuss them in the comments section. Right? See you next time, and thank you for being there.